Aaron Banks owns what was once the De Beers diamond mine at Kimberley in South Africa. Once a Conservative donor, he then decamped to UKIP and gave his new party £100,000. But when William Hague dismissed his defection as insignificant, he upped that amount to £1 million. He is the founder and now co-chairman of Leave.EU, which would like to be recognised as the official outgroup in the referendum campaign. John Nicholson was familiar as a one-time presenter of the BBC breakfast programme and as a political reporter for many years for the BBC. Now, though, he's a member of Parliament who speaks for the SNP on culture, media and sport. I presume when you were at the BBC you were absolutely impeccably impartial in relation to Scotland?
Indeed, I worked with you, Jonathan. You know the BBC's middle name is impartiality in all things.
Fourth member of our panel. And our first question, please.
Mike D'Souza. At what stage should the state use drones to kill in, quote, self-defence?
Amber Rudd.
Well, it's clear that this refers to the event of the killing of Mohammed Emwazi. And I think we should praise the intelligence service and the relationship that we have with the US that we were able to do this. This was a man over whom we should have absolutely no doubt there was a danger to the United Kingdom. We had all seen him on our screens committing these murders. So I think that it was a good outcome. And the answer to your question is, if this is a clear example of where it was right to use force and it was the right result, because he clearly was and had been a really dangerous man, really capable of inflicting great danger on people who were trying to do really good things, aid workers out in really difficult areas. So if this is an example of when it should be used, I think it's the right one.
John Nicholson.
Well, the intelligence services seem to be firming up their claim, don't they, tonight? And it appears certain that he died today. And I don't think many tears will be being shed for him tonight. The individual concerned was clearly a sadistic psychopath. I'm not entirely sure, however, that his death strikes at the heart of ISIL, as the Prime Minister said today. He was a peripheral figure, though obviously significant in propaganda terms. I find myself tonight, I think, siding with relatives of some of the victims who feel cheated out of the chance to see him on trial. I don't know if you've read what some of the relatives said today. Reg Henning, for example, and Alan Henning's brother said, I would have preferred to see him face justice. I certainly would like to have seen him in a court of law. I recognise, obviously, the difficulties in securing his arrest, but it would have been fascinating and horrific to hear his account of how he was radicalised and what happened to him.
David Haynes's daughter, Bethany, said that she felt instant relief and then added, he wasn't only a pawn in ISIS's stupid game, but knowing it's over, that he's finally dead, still hasn't sunk in. As much as I wanted him dead, I also wanted answers as to why he did it. Why my dad? How did it make a difference? Charlie Faulkner.
If it's possible, a justice process before a court is better than what's happened here, but it will very frequently not be possible. What Jihadi John did has been visible to all of us as a nation, and he brutally murdered 2 UK aid workers. He brutally murdered Japanese hostages and American hostages as well. He plainly posed a danger to Iraqis, to Syrians, and probably to UK nationals as well. I am quite sure that self-defence would have been utterly permissible. Equally, it would be utterly inconceivable that he could have been brought back in any way that would not have endangered other people's lives. So I think it was the right result. I think justice was done. It's very hard to identify precisely what the circumstances might be in every individual case, but this certainly sounds the right case.
Given what you said, was it pertinent for Jeremy Corbyn to have said it would have been, having said he was held to account for his callous and brutal crime, however, it would have been far better for us all if he had been held to account in a court of law?
Yes, I agree with that. If he could have been for the reasons that John indicated and you quoted, it is so much better as if there is a positive justice process. But that will be impossible in certain cases, and this looks like such a case.
Aaron Banks.
Yeah, look, I think it was war, and I think it's entirely justified to kill a combatant. My issue with it is the use of drones for what appears to be an increase in probability of almost sort of judicial murder. And I think that's a bit of an issue, because where you argue self-defence, effectively, where do you draw the line between what is self-defence and what is the government wishing to, let's say, eliminate a threat to the country? So that's my sort of issue with it. But in this particular case, I think it was wholly justified.
David Cameron said it was an act of self-defence, and he also said he posed an ongoing serious threat.
And I completely accept that, but I think my issue is more around the fact that it's you've got the possibility of creep. Where do you draw the line as to what is a threat to the country? In this case, it was justified.
But I would just say that I think the use of drones here is relevant and necessary because it minimises the risk to our men or the soldiers involved. The point is to do it in a way which causes least damage to our side.
Can I go back to our questioner, Mike D'Souza? What's your own answer to your question?
I'd kind of side with some of the things that Aaron Banks was saying, insofar as it's concerning ethically, if you like, when you start using drones and the public isn't aware or there isn't debate about any particular use of them. So the decision to use drones is always outside of debate, and that's a concern.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have thoughts about that or any of the other issues that we are discussing, any answers might be for you after the Saturday broadcast of this programme. The number to ring is 0300 100 444. Anita Anand will be there. Answers at bbc.co.uk is, of course, the email address. Tweet us using the hashtag BBCAQ and follow at BBC Any Questions. Next, please.
David Hannaby. David Cameron has outlined Britain's reform requests to meet the concerns of the British people in his letter to Donald Tusk this week. Are these trivial, or do they represent substantive changes for the...
In brief summary, the 4 points are to protect those countries that are outside the Eurozone from anything that the Eurozone may decide to do, issues relating to competition, opt out from ever closer union, and welfare, and specifically in and out of work benefits.
Well, I don't think they're trivial. I think they're important, and I think we'll hear more about them over the next few weeks. He's written setting these out, and then we'll have the response, and there'll be a negotiation. The great thing is the negotiating period has started, and don't forget, it's not us politicians who decide. The final result of the negotiation will be put to everybody, so it's going to be up to the people to decide. And I would say this, as a new Secretary of State, I've discovered two things about Europe that I found of interest. The first is that the UK does play a very important role of influence within the EU. We arrange things, we convene things, we influence things in all sorts of different areas. But on the other side, I would also say that I do find it big and bossy, and I want that bit dealt with. So I find that David Cameron's proposals, I hope, will address those things, particularly in terms of competition and changing the immigration status in terms of work-related benefits. So I'm looking forward to, I hope, a full negotiation that will then give everybody here and the rest of the country the choice.
And is reform of the work-related benefits, which of course obviously the most controversial because the Europeans say this is extremely problematic, are they a red line for you?
Absolutely. This is what David Cameron has set out. This is the position he has taken. And now he's going to, I hope, try and win those arguments within the EU.
And just to be clear, if he fails to persuade the other member states that there should be specific in-work benefits that are denied immigrants but are not denied those who are citizens of this country, you would vote against.
The principle is that in-work benefits are acting as a draw to European immigration coming here, and we want to change that. He has said that if other EU countries have a different proposal about how to achieve this, he will listen. But the principle is absolutely right, that we don't want in-work benefits paid by the UK to act as a draw to EU immigrants.
Lord Faulkner.
I agree that some of them are significant. I think, for example, making sure that we're not going to be bailing out the Eurozone countries is an important provision. I think the in-work benefit stuff could have a quite significant effect. And I think the government is sensible to try to get as much reform as they can in the context of an impending referendum. But I agree with the questioner that I don't think they're going to fundamentally change the European Union. I hope that they will reform it. My own view is that we should certainly stay in the European Union, come what may.
And therefore, Charlie Faulkner, therefore, if he doesn't win on the in-work benefits, and if, as a result of that, it is for him a red line, and we don't know, but if they can't come up with any deal that he can accept on in-work benefits, or his party won't accept, Cabinet won't accept, you would still vote in favour of remaining in?
I would certainly vote in favour of coming in and staying in. And the way you put your question, the idea that one should leave the European Union because one failed to get a deal on whether it was 4 years or 2 years before the in-work benefits kicked in for migrants strikes me as a quite unwise place to draw a line, which appeared to be what Amber was saying.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that the point is that David Cameron has said he rules nothing out. And this is a negotiation. He's put down the markers. He said what he wants to achieve. The trouble with Charlie's position, is the trouble with Labour's position, is that you don't get any negotiation. You're not going to get any reform. Labour talked about reform and delivered no reform. The only way to get the reform of the EU, to have it working for the best interests of the UK, is to have a proper renegotiation and then a referendum. It's the tough talk like that which is going to get us the best outcome for the country.
It's only talk. It's so empty.
Well, we will see. It's too early. Too early, sir.
UKIP supporting and financing Aaron Banks.
Ooh.
I just wanted to identify where you were coming from in case people thought you had no interest in this politically.
I think you set the scene
that
very
you merely
nicely
had
there,
interest in
Jonathan.
diamonds.
I actually happen to agree with Lord Faulkner there, that it's not really a proper negotiation, it's tinkering around the edge. And whatever your views on the European Union, it's not really fundamental reform of the system. So for that reason, I don't think it's going anywhere very fast. I'm not even sure the other European countries will give him the very limited amount that he wants. I mean, the whole negotiation period has seemed to me a bit like shooting an arrow into the wall and then drawing the target round the arrow, and then come back and claim you've had a great success.
And just to get your position clear, regardless of what he achieved in relation to this, regardless of what he achieved at all, you would be in favour of, obviously, because of your position, you're in support of one of the movement, you're co-chairing on this, get out, come what may.
I'm a businessman, and essentially when you go into a negotiation, you don't start by saying, well, yes, let's say you're buying a car, that I'm going to buy that car regardless of what we say. So he started off by really being very pro-European to start with, or pro-EU, and regardless of the outcome, he's going to lobby to stay in.
And you, regardless of the outcome, are going to lobby to get out?
Well, I think it comes down to, my main points would be that we view that British law should be supreme over EU law, and we should then choose which of the laws that we wish to sign up to. And I think this kind of debate that it's either or, is quite wrong.
So, sorry, that's
and Amber's point, by the way, on influence, out of 55 council votes where Britain objected, we lost every single one.
And so just to be
so
clear,
there's no influence.
You say, can I just clarify on this? It's not for you, although you've bunged $1 million to UKIP, it's not either or. For you, you could consider saying yes if it was tough enough.
To me, it's not a dogmatic thing. It's about the fact that Europe isn't working. What we have is, in Germany, you've got a currency that's 35% undervalued. They're exporting like crazy. In Southern Europe, you've got currencies that are 35% overvalued. A clear business case is it's insanity. And in fact, what's happening is you've got mass unemployment across the south, in Greece, in Italy, in Spain. You've got a booming economy in Germany. It's just like the ERM and the PEG all over again. And whatever politicians say, it will ultimately be decided by the market and the forces in those countries.
So that's the euro. What about the European Union?
And what about John Nicholson?
Well, of course, David Cameron doesn't really want to leave Europe at all, but he's being buffeted by his own party. I sit in the House of Commons and I watch some of the Europhobes, the kind of swivel-eyed, obsessives. to mix my Radio 4 programmes, if this was Desert Island Discs, I'd be swimming towards the sharks. To get away from some of them, no names, no Patron. His demands are very modest. Nigel Lawson has called them disappointingly unambitious. But I expect very soon we'll witness David Cameron returning from Europe, waving a triumphant negotiating document, and he will be
landing
lauded.
at Croydon Airport.
Well, exactly. I didn't want to draw two exact parallels, but indeed, the steps of the aircraft announcing his triumphant success. Look, my position and my party's position is very clear. We're in favour of Europe for all sorts of reasons, not least the jobs that it brings. And the opinion polls show just how dangerous the results of Mr Cameron's brinkmanship are, because the last YouGov poll I saw had 57% of Scots wanting to stay in the European Union, only 28% wanting to leave. But by contrast, 43% of English people want to leave and only 40% want to remain. So it could well be that we have a referendum in which Scotland votes to stay and England votes to pull out. And wouldn't that be a dramatic result?
Well, the implication of that is that for you, given that you are passionate for independence, it'd be rather good if the vote turned out to be no, because you might have a better chance, A, of getting your referendum on separation, and B, you could then hope, conceivably, that you get to stay or get into Europe.
Well, we don't call it separation, we call it independence. Separation is altogether too negative a word. But I am in favour of Europe, and I want to see Scotland, I want to see the United Kingdom remaining in the European Union, and I will be campaigning for that, as will my party.
As John says, there is so much at stake in this European referendum. It's not just staying in Europe, which I think is absolutely key to the prosperity of the country. It's holding the Union together. And I don't just want to stay in the European Union. I want to stay a part of the United Kingdom as well.
And do you believe that the consequence, which is what in my question to John Nicholson, do you believe that if the vote was no, it would be more likely that the Scottish would vote for independence?
I have no doubt that if the vote was no to the European Union, that Nicola Sturgeon would then do everything in her power to have a referendum in Scotland, and I have absolutely no idea what the result would be, but it would be completely in the air as to what the result would be.
Charlie, I've certainly talked to plenty of no voters, a lot of them businessmen, who say that they voted no, but they voted no because Scotland is part of the European Union, and they would hate for Scotland to be pulled out of the European Union on England's coattails.
Amber Rudd.
It's disappointing to hear John say that he's against a referendum. I thought you were for referendums, John.
I didn't say I was against the referendum.
Oh, you're for the referendum, having it next year, or the year
think
after?
It's happening. I think it's a
next
perfectly
year.
good...
No, sorry, or the year
Amber,
after.
just to clarify, Amber Rudd
Next
is
year
in
or
favour
the
of having
year
a
after.
referendum next year,
Thank you so
which
much.
is politically quite interesting.
slip.
Yes,
Early slip.
That was revelatory. I bet you didn't mean to say that, did you, Amber?
I said this year or the next year. What I'm trying to establish is the fact that we're the only party that actually said we were going to deliver a referendum. And it's very disappointing to hear that you're against it. It's
I
disappointing.
did say I was against it for the second time. I'm
Hang on,
perfectly
let's go through
relaxed.
what we are saying. Leave that
Perfectly
aside,
relaxed
make your
about
point, but whether he said
My point
against
is that I think that we're the government that is trying to get on with it, that is trying to deliver the best outcome for the United Kingdom. Aaron is for out whatever, clearly. Charlie is for in whatever. John, I'm not quite clear on. But the fact is that we think we can do better and get an EU that will actually deliver stronger for the United Kingdom. And I think that the important thing to remember is that you are the people who are going to decide that outcome, not us here.
But you're for pretending to negotiate, but
I am
actually
not
really
pretending.
wanting to stay in.
I'm not for
We know
pretending.
that.
I'm for getting a proper result. Yeah. And that's what I think the people expect. To take the view that we can just ignore it, to say that the referendum is a risk. This is an important subject for the UK, and we need to decide on it. Everybody here, everybody in the United Kingdom.
But you're not taking credit for the because it was the threat of UKIP to the Conservative Party that brought about the referendum in the first place. It's completely disingenuous.
Okay.
I'm not feeling
We'll leave
threatened,
it there with the footnote that you first heard it here, that a cabinet minister said that she was in favour of a referendum next year, and then hurriedly added, or the year after.
This year or
It's
next
that Tracy
year, to be
Crouch
clear.
moment, isn't it?
We will go to our next.
Philip Hynes, are junior doctors right to consider strike action?
Are junior doctors right to consider strike action? Charlie Faulkner.
they are right to consider doing the maximum they can to get some honest debate going with this government on their position. The government said they were going to get an 11% pay rise. They then looked not just at the small print, but the print, and realised that the 11% pay rise was on their basic pay, but their overtime was going to be dramatically reduced, so very many of them were going to have a reduced pay. What they then did was they said, well, could we talk about this, please? And what the government have said, in effect, is if you don't agree with us, we will impose this new contract on you. This is not about the junior doctors asking for extra money. This is the government trying to impose a totally disingenuously presented contract on them that will make them work harder and for many of them lose money. It is not the way to treat junior doctors. The junior doctors are a vital and successful part of the National Health Service. Should they go on strike? I'm not in favour of doctors, for example, putting anybody who comes to A&E at risk, people who are requiring care at risk. But if this government does not properly talk to them, and they should properly talk to them, then they, the junior doctors, needs to think, what can they do to put pressure on the government that does not put patients' well-being or lives at risk? Well, and if they find something, I will support them in that respect.
Are you saying that if it's been put to the vote, the possibility, if the strikes are called, as the BMA has already identified, and they come out, you will support them coming out on strike regardless of what you said about the problems?
I will not support the doctors if they... every junior doctor I've spoken to is in complete agreement with this. They are not, of whatever the terms of the ballot may be, they will not go on strike in such a way that people in intensive care will be put at risk. They will not go on strike in relation to people in accident and emergency not being properly treated. But if the position is that it might involve, and I'd say this, recognising the problems that cancelling outpatient clinics can cause, but if you could have industrial action, for example, that involved cancelling certain non-vital outpatient clinics, things like that, then I think as long as they've thought very carefully about how it's done, then I do not think they should just be rolled over by the government.
One more thing to you, Dr. Sarah Wollaston, who is a Conservative, she chairs the Health Committee. She's been very critical in the past of the ministry. I think it would be highly unsafe for patients, knowing what's happening. When you think of the number of procedures that might not be emergencies, but are extremely urgent, to have 3 days, including 2 of them a full walkout, will be putting patients in significant harm. And I think it's appalling that the BMA are taking this action. Well, so where do you come in relation to that?
What Sarah Wollaston is saying, as I understand it, is that if there is a procedure that, without it being done or being delayed for 3 days, might put somebody's life at risk, then the doctors should do the procedure. But I am sure that identifiable steps can be identified, which the junior doctors can take, which will put pressure on the government. I read in the paper today that Mr. Jeremy Hunt, who I understand to be the Secretary of State for Health, says he has got the support of Mr. David Cameron, who I understand to be the Prime Minister, in taking what Mr. Jeremy Hunt briefed the Times was a tough line in relation to this. And if the man called Mr. Hunt says that we'll take a tough line, he also said in this article he thinks the public would then turn against the junior doctors. Well, I hope that Mr. Hunt heard that.
Well, I should stress that whatever he heard from the audience here, this is a self-selecting audience from the area around and isn't in any way politically selected. No, that's not your privilege, I'm afraid.
No hands went up. There's not a junior doctor in the place. They're all working, exactly.
Just so we know where we are with the proposed changes, before I bring in the others, the 11% pay rise that Charlie Faulkner referred to in basic pay would rise from 22 for new doctors, 22,636 to 25,500. There's a 25% cut in the hours that are presently classed as unsociable and therefore attract extra payment, a reduction in the maximum working week from 91 hours to 72 hours. That's the basic core facts. Obviously, it's as always more complicated than that. How do you look at it, Aaron Banks?
I think it's a promise that was made at the election to move the NHS to 7 days a week. I don't think they've got the funding to follow through on the promise, and that's led to a lot of the problems. It costs £100,000 to train a junior doctor. And, in the car on the way down here, I actually thought this question might come up, so I called a local doctor friend to see what he thought. And his view of life was that, strike or no strike, junior doctors are leaving the NHS in droves. There will be an exodus. So maybe it's good to bring it to a head with the threat of the action. And maybe the government, faced with the actual strike action, might sit down. The final thing in favour of the government is that he did end by saying the doctors should get round the table and talk about it. They didn't favour strike action. But his point was that they're going to go anyway because they're highly trained people. They can move to Australia, New Zealand, America, where they don't have to put up with this.
John Nicholson.
Well, I also know doctors, and I don't agree with Aaron. I don't think doctors will leave the profession because they've got a vocation, and the government takes advantage of that. It takes advantage of their sense of pride in their vocation. How on earth do we get ourselves in a position where we have doctors marching on the street because of their conditions? It's truly shocking. It's one of these situations, again, sitting in the Commons as a new Member of Parliament. I look at Jeremy Hunt and I think it would be so good if he understood something about medicine.
Couldn't you apply that to any Secretary of State in any department through time?
Yes. I often do, Jonathan. You see, our Shadow Secretary of State for Health, Dr. Philippa Whitford, is a cancer specialist. So only a couple of months ago, she was in hospitals operating. She's one of Scotland's leading cancer surgeons. So you always see the whites of Jeremy Hunt's eyes every time Dr. Philippa stands up and faces him across the dispatch box because she knows what she's talking about. So I do hope it'll get resolved. Like Charlie, I certainly hope that doctors don't go out on strike because not just would it be terrible for the patients, but it would be terrible to have seen such a breakdown in the levels of trust that should exist between government and health professionals, that doctors would feel themselves forced into that position. So I would urge Jeremy Hunt to show a bit of common sense, to look again at the doctors' pay and conditions, at the truly atrocious hours that they work, and reach a sensible settlement with them.
Amber Rudd.
Thank you. I think that the problem is that the current contract incentivises junior doctors to work long hours. The proposals that have been put forward here, which have indeed the 11% pay rise, are about working within regular hours and are trying to limit the extra hours that doctors work, so they're not incentivised to do so. But at the core of this is a commitment that we made, and we were elected on this in the manifesto, to address the weekend problem of health. 5 out of 6 of the recent studies demonstrated that if you get ill at a weekend, you're much more likely to have an adverse circumstantial reaction. So the point is to move to a 7-day-a-week health service. We've put in, well, we put £7 billion extra money under the last government. We've promised to put £8 billion and then another £2 billion in under this period of Parliament. So we are the government that is trying to put as much money as is needed, that Simon Stevens has indeed called for, in order to address this. So we are trying to move to a safer system, which is 7 days, which will be better for patients and also, we think, better for junior doctors because their hours will be better controlled.
But if you have that commitment and you fund that commitment in the way that you've described, but leaves junior doctors who on the whole are thought to be very committed individuals apparently believing that they're going to suffer as a result, you haven't been very smart, have you?
Well, that's why, and I think everybody on the panel did actually refer to this, we need to get everybody back round the table to discuss it. I mean, the BMA have dug their feet in over this, and we want them to do is to come back to the table to discuss it.
Well, they've said they'll only come back to the table if the doctors agree 23 out of the 25 demands. So if you want them round the table, say you'll have a proper negotiation. Can you give us that commitment now?
Well, I can't do it right now, but
No,
I'm
right,
sure
okay.
that there are various people listening. But I do think that it always takes 2 people, as we know, Charlie, to get back round the table.
does.
The government has said they want
does.
to do that. The BMA need to listen and come back to the table.
Yeah, but they can't come back to the table if you won't talk to them.
Well, we will talk to them. The BMA, I think, have been completely misleading.
Why don't you say no preconditions then to the talks? Say that now.
I think I'll have to... I think I'll have to take that one under advisement.
And the other point...
You can't, to be serious about the way you've been in government, Charlie Faulkner, you can't, if the commitment's made, the talk's been going on, for 2 years or something, or the thing, you can't then say, when it's reached this point, can you, no conditions at all? There's a start as if we were tabula rasa, clean slate on the whole thing. You can't do that, can you? No government would do that.
You certainly can.
And
if the position is that the big sticking point is the relationship between the basic pay and the overtime pay, and also what the working arrangements are, you can't sort those out with every one of those moving parts being in play. If you say some of those parts will not be in play in the negotiations, you create unnecessary difficulties in the negotiations. And it is really time, I think, for the government to take this seriously, not just because of the way that they're treating the junior doctors, but because of the way they are treating the patients in the health service. And they have to be serious about it.
Don't be misleading. We are taking this seriously.
No, you're
and
not.
That's, absolutely we are, Charlie. And that's why we're asking them to come back to the table to discuss it. There's some... Don't forget that the purpose of addressing this whole renegotiation in terms of doing a new contract is not to save money, it's to get better health outcomes, which you haven't touched on at all. Are you as concerned as we are about the patients at weekends, Charlie? Do you mind about that?
Can I touch? Could I intervene briefly?
No, you can in a second, but
just I
will let everyone in, because this is very important stuff. Just on the central point of the weekends, which you said you want to come to, very briefly, Charlie Faulkner.
The health outcomes thing is not about an absence of junior doctors at the weekends. They are there at the weekends anyway. The real issue about that is consultant cover in intense areas. And that is the issue, and it's nothing to do with junior doctors.
Consultants also need the junior doctors there.
They're there
That's
already.
part of it.
They're there already at the weekends.
This wouldn't be happening if that were the case, Charlie. The junior doctors need to adapt to this new contract in order for it to work at weekends.
Amber, could I suggest that you take a trip north of the border, because we don't have doctors marching the street. We don't have doctors going on strike. We've got a devolved health system north of the border, and we have resolved these issues. So it might be worth a bit of a field trip just to pick up some hints.
Aaron Banks.
I think the problem is they're trying to fund a 7-day-a-week health service with 5 days of funding. That's the problem. You can cut it whichever way you like. That's the basic problem.
You will assuredly have views about this one way or the other. Number 03700 100 444 for any answers, and the email address once more any.answers@bbc.co.uk. We will go to our next, please.
Will Heinzelman. In light of the Energy Secretary's letter leaked earlier this week, which shows the UK is not on track to meet its 2020 renewable energy targets, should the government reconsider its recent drastic cuts to renewable energy support?
But before we come to what the government should do, just to confirm, you did write this letter which pointed this out, which was leaked.
Indeed.
Yes. And you wish it rather had not been leaked, since it released information which had been asked for in the summer, which everyone was rather irritated to discover that actually you were acknowledging facts which, in the summer, people were asking whether these facts were true or not, and they were being told, oh no, everything's hunky-dory.
No, I wouldn't put quite that interpretation on it. I'm very happy to address the letter. The letter, as the questioner said, refers to the fact that the renewable energy targets for 2020 are difficult to meet. And in the letter, I set out alternative ways of doing it. What I have said is that we are making good progress towards the 2020 target, which is that we are over halfway on the interim target. We have exceeded at 6.3%. But in terms of the reference to the renewable electricity, our target was always to have 30% of renewable electricity by 2020 as part of that target, which we will probably exceed, but certainly meet. The problem within the renewable energy target is transport and heat, and those areas need to be addressed, which is what I set out in the letter. But just to roll back...
I'll bring you back in again, but I want just to get the thing. Should the government reconsider its drastic cuts to renewable energy support, which is getting rid of the subsidies for some green energy, nuclear... Sorry, not nuclear. Definitely not nuclear. Wind energy specifically, and photovoltaic cells and the rest. Aaron.
We've got a wind farm that's proposed just down the road, so it's a hot topic in our village at the moment. But it strikes me that, particularly on the wind, that there's been a huge transfer of money to rich landowners to put up these wind farms are pretty inefficient. So I think that there needs to be a lot more thought into, A, securing the energy for the country through nuclear, gas and traditional methods, and then think, afterwards about the renewable energy, because it just doesn't provide the energy required. So the first job is to secure energy.
And you believe that the government should or should not reconsider its...
I think it should reconsider it, yes.
Should reconsider its cuts?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're running a £100 billion deficit, and I think that somewhere we have to start to think about.
So you do support the
efficiency.
cuts to
I do
renewable
support.
energy?
You support the
Yes.
cuts. So, no, they've been
That's what
cuts.
I
You
say,
don't.
yes,
You want
yes.
to reconsider. You don't. Reconsidering the cuts in this context means increasing the expenditure rather than reducing.
Jonathan, you're confusing me. So
I'm doing my best. John Nicholson.
Well, congratulations, first of all, to Ecologist magazine for their investigative journalism in getting this scoop. So let's just summarise for those who are not absolutely up to date with their wind farm news. Amber Rudd has admitted that the UK will fail to meet its EU obligations to deliver 15% of energy consumption by 2020. That's the basis of the story. In fact, it will only reach figures of about 11.5%. But here's the irony for such a Eurosceptical party. She said that the Treasury could perhaps go to other European Union countries to perhaps make up the difference, which seems a bit extraordinary to me. Now, obviously, it's particularly absurd as well, given what the Treasury has been doing to our own renewables, because we've seen a situation in which there's been these quite dramatic cutbacks. The Treasury is getting rid of some of the benefits that our own renewable energy has had. The support, for example, for onshore wind is going to be removed next year. So I think the government's getting this absolutely back to front, because what we should be doing is investing in the future in renewable energy. That is the future for this country, and it's silly Tory dogma to stop it.
Charlie Faulkner.
I think 3 short points. First of all, I think we should have an open discussion about this rather than being dependent upon the excellent Guardian to extract leaked letters from the Department of Energy and Climate Change.
The Ecologist.
Sorry,
Yes,
not
the
Guardian.
Ecologist. The Guardian picked up the story from the Ecologist magazine.
Could I apologise to the
He
Ecologist?
says as a member of the NUJ.
Yes. Secondly, the one thing that is not being suggested, and in my view rightly, is that any attempt should be made to change these targets. And the reason that we shouldn't be trying to change these targets is exactly the reason that John said, namely, it is the future. We need to ensure there is an increase in the use of renewable energy. And thirdly, it is absolutely plain that a contributing factor to this is a reduction in the subsidies that have come in relation to renewable energy. So we definitely need to look at that. Of course, it's got to be looked at in an economically responsible way, but it looks pretty simple. Be open. We're not abandoning the targets. The reduction in subsidies obviously had an effect on this, so let's do something about it.
And Amber. Amber, I note here, when you were re-elected, you promised, I want to unleash a new solar revolution.
Absolutely.
We've got 1 million people with solar panels. The number needs to increase.
The light's gone out on the revolution, I think.
And I just wonder whether your letter suggests a little frustration with the cabinet colleagues who insisted on cutting the subsidies that make possible reaching the target of 15%, which is going to now fall short, by your own account, by 25%.
But interestingly, not on electricity. Electricity is the area which we're doing incredibly well on, obviously, which covers solar. When I first came into government, what I found was that the planned expenditure of renewable support was substantially over budget. I mean, substantially over budget. So I had to rein back in order to reduce the subsidy, not just willfully, but because it affects everybody's bills. Those subsidies on renewable energy, electricity, are put on your bills. And if we've agreed a budget, which we had, it may be pennies to you, but it's pounds to other people, and that matters. And it also matters to small businesses, to whom it's hundreds of pounds. That is really relevant. And the final thing I would say about the energy supply in the UK is we need a mix. Of course we need renewables, but we also need nuclear and we need gas. So having the right mix is the way we are absolutely sure about security of supply, because that will always come first.
But at the moment, you are not going to reach the target to which you've committed yourself unless there is some change somewhere.
And I have said that in order to make that target, which I am still committed to, we need to take action, and that's what I'm looking at doing.
I'm going to go back to our questioner, Will Heinzelman.
I just wanted to come back to the first point you made. Yes, we may be on track to reach the 30% electricity by 2020, but as a country, we're committed to reducing our emissions by 80% by 2050. It strikes me that if we're on track to do something, we're going to exceed it. Why not continue to exceed it when we know we're going to have to really step up what we're doing after 2020 to meet those future targets?
The point about the letter and me sending it out to other departments was to bring the other departments into it, because it's a commitment that is across departments. So I need transport to address it as well. I need DEFRA to get involved. And as far as the 80% commitment for 2050, you're right, that's incredibly important. And we have the carbon budget, and we will continue to commit to work with the Climate Change Committee on meeting those.
Quickly, let's move on.
Okay, all I was going to say was that the energy policy is pretty well wiped out industrial heartland anyway, and so the real issue on global warming is China and India and places like that, rather than what the UK is doing.
Which is why we're going to get a global deal, I hope, later this year.
Which we will return to, I have no doubt, in this programme in due course, but we're going to swiftly go to our one last question.
Andrew Lay. If at PMQs Jeremy Corbyn reads a letter from a David from Oxfordshire who is worried about cuts to his local services, will the Prime Minister admit he doesn't understand the impact of his own policies?
Very briefly, this relates to a spat between his own local authority, Mr Hudspeth, who was cross about the fact that he was having to face a reduction in the council's grant from 194 million a year to 122 million, a drop of 72 million, and allegedly the Prime Minister regarded that as a slight fall, and he didn't care for that. So, very briefly, much deserves more time, but very briefly, John Nicholson.
Well, isn't it delightful to see the Oxfordshire Tories fighting with their local Member of Parliament over cuts? He clearly doesn't understand. There's a touch of the Marie Antoinette about Mr Cameron, isn't there? Can't you not cut libraries? Well, let's see if he gets reselected. That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Aaron Banks.
I've really got nothing good to say about David Cameron, but as a constituency MP, it's his duty to stick up for the people that elected him. So I think he's quite right to do it.
OK. And Amber Rudd.
Well, Aaron's absolutely right. That's what constituency MPs do. And whatever your additional job might be in Parliament, you also engage with your local council to make sure that where they make cuts, where they make changes, they're ones that you might think is the right thing to do. So I can tell you that my county council gets plenty of letters also from Amber from Hastings.
Is a drop of from 194 million to 122 million in Hastings the equivalent of a slight fall?
I think that for East Sussex County Council overall, the numbers are a bit larger.
Charlie Faulkner didn't answer the question. Charlie Faulkner.
The Prime Minister wrote to the leader of his county council and said, what's this? You're closing libraries, elderly care is going down, and museums are closing. Yes, David, we're closing it because you've cut all this money. Surely you can make other savings. We've already made all the savings. I'm afraid there's nothing left. To which he replied, good grief. And that was the Prime Minister who was leading all these cuts.